On this planet, there is one band that I do not trust anyone, with the exception of my mother. I do not trust them if they do not like the Doors. And we're talking about the Doors in front of the door. Now we're gonna start with the Lizard King, Jim Morrison, Mr. Mojo Rising. Now, a lot of people may not know this, but while Jim was writing poetry and eventually would write great songs, his dad was doing a little ditty called The Vietnam War. This is actually true. Jim Morrison's dad is Admiral Morrison, who was stationed in the Gulf of Tonkin. Now, if you know anything about your Vietnam history, I sure as hell know way too much. He was stationed there in the Gulf of Tonkin with several other admirals when the Gulf of Tonkin incident happened, which was we had falsely reported that the Vietnamese had attacked one of our ships and essentially lied in the report to then send in troops to Vietnam, which is so ironic because if Admiral Morrison was that admiral, and many signs point to him being the one, that would mean that his own son not only rebelled against his dad in the sense of doing whatever the hell he wanted against his father's wishes, he became the anti-Vietnam War icon. So many moronic conspiracy theorists think Jim is a plant because of that, oh, of course, he's like MK Ultra and he's a plant to ensure the New World Order, which makes no sense. I swear to God, conspiracy theorists can be the dumbest human beings on the planet.
When he ended up in rock music, I was absolutely flabbergasted. Well, he called me on the phone, said he was going on the road with a rock band. And it took me a little bit to gathering what he was really saying, but then, sure enough, that's what it was. And I told him that's ridiculous. That you're not a singer, you can't sing. And I told him he was really, I said, you are on the wrong track here.
He went to basically make movies. He actually ran into Ray Manzarek, which would become the keyboard player for the Doors, who was an awesome jazz musician. And from there they met the jazz drummer John Densmore. They started to play around together and they thought Jim was weird because of all his poetry. But they quickly realized they had something really strange and unique when they invented the song Moonlight Drive into existence, with Robby Krieger just messing around on some slide guitar.
We're doing Moonlight Drive, and Robby says, this might work. I show him the chord changes. It's very simple, G's and C's and whatnot. Robby opens the guitar case, and in that middle thing, he opens that middle thing and pulls out this weapon, this broken glass bottleneck. From like a green Gallo wine bottle, all jagged, fits right in the hand. It's like, I said, where the hell do you play, man? What kind of gigs? I mean, that's a weapon and a half.
Yeah, you have to protect yourself in some of these bars.
You would cut, wow. Robby says, Ray, that's not a weapon. I said, the hell it's not. He said, no, it's a bottleneck. Puts it on his finger, and he goes, Morrison elevates off the floor, about 6 inches.
Park beside the ocean on our moonlight drive.
From there, they started playing clubs together, and they would do strange experimental jams where Jim would shy away from the audience while the band members would improv, and then Jim would make things up on the fly. And at the Whiskey, which they were eventually asked to be the house band of, things would just go down. And they became a infamous chaotic band.
How would you guys like to be the house band at the Whiskey A Go-Go? The three of us go, yes! And Jim says, hold on. He said, we got to think about it. Why don't you come back in a day or two and we'll give you the answer. She leaves. We attack Morrison. Wait, God damn it!
We have to talk about how each member brought something so important and unique to the sound. Jim Morrison with his strange singing and poetry lyrics. We of course have John Densmore laying on some usually jazz beats, but also bossa nova with the song Break On Through, which we'll get to in a second. And as well as you have Robby Krieger, who would sometimes do slide guitar, bluesy guitar licks, and then Ray Manzarek, who's essentially playing circus music over this psychedelic music. It was not like anything put in the music industry at that point, and this was hot goddamn fire.
I think these days, especially in the States, you have to be a politician or an assassin or something to really be a superstar.
Let me sleep all night in your soul creature, while my mind
song Break On Through to the Other Side would eventually become a huge hit, but at this time they were still a little underground, except for locally. They were pretty well known as the crazy band The Whiskey. But they would get real success when they started to rebel against censorship, because the song Break On Through kept getting censored because they keep saying in the song, she gets high.
She get higher.
In those days, you know, if you wanted to get a song on the radio, you couldn't say hi.
But they broke out when they went on the Ed Sullivan Show to play their epic song that Robby wrote called Light My Fire. Many of you know it has crazy keyboard sections and one of the best guitar solos ever. Classic, famous song from them. It's damn near 7 minutes long. But they went on there and they were told, please do not say the lyric, girl, we couldn't get much higher. They just were not ready for that. The hippie age was just happening at this point, so everyone was very conservative about this idea. And many think that Jim rebelled against that and said the lyric anyways because, oh, Jim was sticking it to the man, and a lot of the band members and fans love to act like that. But I think Jim honestly just forgot to change the lyric.
They didn't want us to say, girl, you couldn't get much higher.
Jim did it anyway, and then they said, you'll never do this show again. And we said, well, we just did it. We only wanted to do it once.
Girl, we couldn't get much higher. Come on, baby, light my fire.
You have many other classic songs on here like Soul Kitchen and Backdoor Man, which is basically the exact same song as Soul Kitchen. Even the worst songs on here, like Alabama Whiskey Song, which is essentially just a cover song of some old German drinking song, is awesome and catchy. Please show me the way to the next whiskey bar. But now we've got to talk about my favorite song, the song to end the album, my favorite song of all time, arguably, and the song that got me into the band. Now, mind you, my all-time favorite film is Apocalypse Now. And for all of you that have seen it, if you haven't seen it, go do it because it's the best movie ever made. It has the song open the film over footage of napalm explosions, and it's all throughout the movie. It's essentially an 11-minute epic jam session that the band would play at the Whiskey all the time. It would constantly change. But even the studio recording is just lightning in a bottle. Classic stuff here. It slowly builds the intensity, and they even took something that was from the live versions that you wouldn't think that they'd put in there, which is the part at the end of the build-up when Jim is talking about that Oedipus complex thing. So this is the point where the band blew up. They became hugely controversial for all of these groundbreaking things that they were doing and bucking the trends, as well as Jim became a huge sex appeal monster, which freaked everyone out even more.
As a musician, you should never concern yourself with legacy. You should only concern yourself about this moment in time. You have to capture a Zen moment in time, and that's all you should be concerned about. And if you do that, and we did that because we had opened the doors of perception. We had taken our hallucinogenic substances.
Strange days have found us.
Even though the first album is the closest to my heart, I can't deny that song for song, Strange Days is the Doors' best album and quite possibly the greatest psychedelic rock album of all time. They got an 8-track for this, so they were able to add way more atmosphere. When with this bigger budget, it became probably the Sgt. Pepper's of psychedelic rock. Hey, isn't Sgt. Pepper's already psychedelic rock? Hey, quit asking completely logical questions. But they were inspired heavily by bands like the Beatles and the experimentation that they were doing. And they had so many bangers on here, like Love Me Two Times, which the band, I believe, were kind of writing more about them and the groupies they were leaving behind. But it became a pretty big Vietnam War song because all the veterans were getting drafted, and if they fell in love with someone before they went, well, love me 2 times before I go away.
We talked about a lot of darker things, and I actually wrote a song called Love Me 2 Times, which I envisioned a guy with his girlfriend, and he's going off to Vietnam the next day, so love me 2 times, I'm going away.
Love me 2 times, I'm going away.
He babbles sometimes, and in interviews he seems so shy and strange and aloof. But how can you say this man's a drunken idiot with some of the songs on here that are so emotional and touching that even girls like the Doors? Case in point, the song People Are Strange, which became a massive hit. Everyone loved this song. And the lyrics are genius.
People are strange when you're a stranger. Faces look ugly when you're alone.
Now, my two favorite songs in here are My Eyes Have Seen You, which is very bluesy, but I cannot deny the ending epic on this album, When the Music's Over. It's just a long jam session once again, this time way heavier, and Jim just comes in screaming and more confident than ever. However, rising success always brings its problems.
Jim, after patience.
Hello, I love you, won't you tell me your name? Hello, I love you, let me jump in your game.
Now, right away with Waiting for the Sun, even though they were riding high off these two classics, they were being hit with problems left and right. Everyone thought that they were the devil, that they were a bunch of stupid hippies, that they were being too countercultural. And then they started having problems writing music. They ran out of material from their early days. They started to have troubles with Jim and even had problems with police.
The audience gets very quiet. And then Jim Morrison says, let me tell you what just happened to me here in New Haven. I got maced by a little blue man in a little blue hat. Their motto's supposed to be protect and serve, but it's not, is it? This little blue pig maced me. The cops are all in front of us, protecting us from the audience, supposedly. Why that was necessary, I don't know, but they did that back in those days. One by one, they start turning, not facing the audience, looking at Morrison, and I thought, oh, God. Oh, God, we're in trouble here. Jim stuck the microphone in Captain Kelly's face and said, say your piece, man. What do you want on stage here? What do you want with us? Captain Kelly said, you've gone too far, young man.
And if that wasn't bad enough, the pressure was bad to write good music. And then they had this dictator producer, Paul Rothchild, breathing down their necks. So they come out with the song Hello, I Love You, and #1 hit. They blow up again. What's so strange, though, is that Jim didn't really care for the song Hello, I Love You and just did not want to ever sing it. But then he was bringing the band down during the production of this album, focusing all of their time on a piece called The Celebration of the Lizard. Now, on paper, this sounds like a genius idea. The band keeps doing all these long jam sessions, so let's do like a 17-minute, arguably prog sweet epic type of song, right? But it ended up being an epic disaster because it was 17 minutes of garbage. Jim was so in his head with all these poetic ideas and nonsense. The band was trying to translate it and nothing made sense. Paul Rothchild was trying to help them, but they did it for like 150, 170 takes and it just went nowhere. And what's sad is they ended up using some garbage songs in this album to fill up time because they couldn't finish this. It ended up being a leftover, and they had a couple other songs that they'd have to put on other albums later down the road, like the title track, Waiting for the Sun, one of the heaviest things they've ever wrote, and they were wasting all this time on the Celebration of the Lizard. It just doesn't make sense at all. In fact, it's quite embarrassing to listen to a lot of the times because they'll just be doing strange ambient sections, then Jim just goes, wake up! This should have been the abortion of the Lizard King and just chuck that out instead of wasting all this time, because now we're trapped with Wintertime Love and Summertime Hate and all these filler songs. But the one good section of Celebration of the Lizard was eventually turned into a song on this album, and it actually did turn out okay, but it is really weird.
Run with me.
And then you have one of the earliest examples of Jim writing a song about his red-headed, hot, fiery bitch, Pam, which had a very toxic relationship with Jim. They'd beat the crap out of each other. He'd drink all the time and neglect her, and then she'd get hooked on heroin, and yada, yada, yada. He'd cheat on her, she'd cheat on him. Of course, you have The Unknown Soldier, a song that they directly dedicate to Vietnam veterans, the ones that no one can recognize. And I love how when they played it live, they'd get so theatrical that John would smack drumsticks together and break them, and then Jim would fall with the sound of a bullet.
And it's all over for the unknown soldier.
And at the end of the album, you have probably the best song on here, the heavy, confident, in-your-face, ballsy, 5-1, probably the greatest vocal performance from Jim, getting gruff and heavy on there. And what makes it interesting and ironic is that this song almost seems to be rebelling against the hippies.
5-1, baby, 1 in 5. No.
Honestly, still a really great album. You're not going to find a bad Doors album, but it is a step down. Now, Jim was starting to spiral out of control on alcohol at this point, and he even collapsed on stage. And then they eventually created so much controversy that they started an entire decency march in Miami.
Miami was definitely a turning point in the career of the Doors.
You're all a bunch of slaves. Let people tell you what you're gonna do. How long are you gonna let them push you around? There are no rules. There are no laws. Do whatever you want to do. Do it.
And Jim finally said to them, he said, "What do you want? What do you want from us? We're a rock and roll band. We play some pretty good songs, but you want something more, don't you?" Yeah. And I'm going, oh my God, the guy is drunk. He's going to expose himself.
Jim did not expose himself at Miami, okay?
He got busted for indecent exposure, public profanity, public drunkenness, and my favorite, simulation of oral copulation. So he was found guilty on 2 counts, facing 3 years, perhaps less, 1.5 years in Rayford Penitentiary.
Jim, you're facing 3.5 years in state prison for the Miami incident. The scope of this trial goes way beyond rock and roll. It's really about the First Amendment.
What we're testing down there is the issue of artistic freedom of expression.
As it rains in the trees in the night.
So Jim was getting overwhelmed at this time. He's facing possible jail time, getting drunk all the time, and then fighting with Pam at every other opportunity. So he wasn't safe at home or on tour. But then he'd start taking it out on the band and would be completely unreliable for sessions and rehearsals. And the band wanted to start experimenting and was being pushed by the producer Paul Rothchild to incorporate more string instruments and symphonics into the sound.
Okay, we've done 3 albums in exactly the same setting, the same configuration. Let's bring in the horn players and the string players.
The idea of strings and horns was something Ray and I talked about before we even made our first album, because we love jazz. And it's something we wanted to experiment with.
And Jim was just having none of that. He kept fighting them on every corner. And he was sort of right, even though he was not really providing anything, especially on this album. He didn't give very many lyrics at all and would just complain about everything and wouldn't record certain vocals. At the same time, he was kind of right. Honestly, the worst songs are the ones that try to do this Paul Rothchild vision of changing the sound up. But the great thing is they've had a recent remaster that actually removes almost all these weird instruments added to the sound, so it's just the Doors only. That brings us to the hit song Touch Me, which has all of these elements, and Jim of course fought it at every corner and hates the song, but it actually turned out really strong.
I'm gonna love you till the stars fall from the sky.
But the best moments are the ones that Jim was fully on board for. Of course, Wild Child Shaman Blues, and the awesome title track, which has some of Jim's best poetry, best lines, and that jam in the middle, the psychedelic jam where Jim is of course saying, "This is the part, this is the trip," is one of the best songs they've ever done. And you cannot ever have a bad, long Doors song, unless it's Celebration of the Lizard.
Everything must be this way.
But what's so dumb is that they didn't pick more of these Doors-sounding songs for singles. They picked the dumbest, stupid songs like Running Blue, which sounds like hillbilly music, for singles. Now, it might be the worst album. That's like saying the worst hand job. Like, you're still coming, ain't you?
What do you think the role of a rock shaman is in a time of, say, social turmoil?
I don't think the shaman, from what I've read, is really too interested in defining his role in society. He's just more interested in pursuing his own fantasies.
Now, as if Jim couldn't be stressed out enough, he was now getting accusations from an airline stewardess that him and his friend had sexually harassed her. So he was looking at serious jail time until she said, well, actually it was Jim's friend, not him. Maybe she got paid off there, but the band wanted to change directions to a more bluesy sound. And this time, Jim was fully on board, despite putting on a lot of weight and putting on the beard, become big beer drinking Jim, big belly Jim. He came back into the fold big time, writing way more lyrics and very interested in this direction. And now we are back. And they come out right out the gate with Roadhouse Blues, one of the most classic songs. Jim was having dinners every night at the Roadhouse, going there and having a Jack Daniels for dinner.
Keep your eyes on the road, you have to pound the wheel.
And they just keep hitting on this album, like the bluesy slow Spy, which is about his toxic relationship with Pam. And you have Peace Frog, which sounds like baseball stadium music.
In the streets, it's up to my ankles. Sheep in the streets, it's up to my knees.
And this album has two different sides with different names for some reason. One of them's Hard Rock Cafe, the other one's Morrison Hotel. Now the best songs though come later in the album, like Queen of the Highway and the slow 5-to-1 similar sounding Maggie McGill that lived on a hill, and it just hits as hard as 5-to-1 ever did back in the day. Even though he's definitely lost control of his weight, he did not lose control of his voice and charisma.
Maggie McGill, she lived on a hill. Her daddy got drunk and left him.
Now there are weak songs in this, like the last two albums. Yeah, what the hell's the deal with like the two drunken sailor pirate songs in the album? They should have just chucked those out and left the album be. Now, what's annoying is a lot of people give so much attention and credit to LA Woman, the next album, for having all these bluesy rockin' elements, but then they ignore Morrison Hotel, which is arguably the better album, that is the one that brought those elements. Nowadays, Doors fans overrate LA Woman so much that it actually makes Morrison Hotel underrated, even though it's probably multi-platinum. But Jim needed to take some time off and work on poetry, because when they tried to continue playing live at the state, he had a complete emotional breakdown on stage. So they're like, we are done being a touring band.
We had one last album to go, and this could be our last album. We're going to make the album in this Zen moment in time. We didn't discuss the future. The future's uncertain. The end is always near.
Really warm a Sunday afternoon.
Despite Jim's demons and mounting beer belly starting to haunt him, he wanted to prove himself and come back hard and show that he could still be the Doors. So they brought in an unofficial fifth member, Elvis's bass player by the name Jerry Sheff, which really got Jim involved because he was a huge Elvis fan, and they finally had a real good bass player to match Jim's really bassy voice at this time. And then all the band members were actually really getting along at this time, which is always funny how every band right before they collapse or end or someone dies, there's always a calm right before the storm. At this point, a literal one. Now, Paul Rothchild started to rebel against the band though, but who cares, because he's a complete dickhead. The band always hated him and he always hated the band. And he started complaining about the songs the band was writing at this time, calling it cocktail music.
Don't you love her badly? Don't you need her badly?
So he tucked his cock between his legs and turned into a tail and hightailed it out the hell out of here. And they brought in the engineer of all these past couple albums, Bruce Hung Dick Botnick, to come make an even better, heavier sounding production than even the last bunch of albums. Not only do you have bluesy mammoths on here like the Crawling King Snake, and of course, I've Been Down So Goddamn Long, but you also have some like funky influence on the opening track, Changeling, which was Jim's favorite and one of mine too.
I live uptown. I live down.
And then the title track, LA Woman, is one of the long epics on here, and it's a classic driving song. And there's really eerie lyrics on here, like I see her hair was burning, hills filled with fire. And the song is actually comparing the city of LA to a woman. And in the middle of the song, they have a slow breakdown where Jim is telling everyone who he is. Once again, Mr. Mojo Rising, which is just Jim Morrison rearranged. And also, her hair is burning could very clearly be a reference to Pam, who was a redhead. I'd love to give a big, huge participation trophy to the song L'America for being a song and nothing else. And then what the hell is Wasp Texas Radio and the Big Beat? It sounds like a spoken intro build-up with some goofy choruses. And then of course, the last song, one of the greatest songs ever written, Riders on the Storm. Jim had his own creepy poetry lyrics that he put over top of it. And then Ray would come in with jazz, make it sound like it was raining, and you have the most atmospheric song they've ever done. A psychedelic type song in the blues era. And it is the greatest atmospheric driving song of all time. And they rode out into the sunset with this song, Riding on the Storm.
Originally came from us jamming on this Ghost Riders in the Sky.
And Jim said, I got lyrics for that. And I said, wait, okay, that's great, man. Riders on the Storm. We can't do Vaughn Monroe, the old cowpoke riding out one dark and windy day. So I said, let me see what I can do with this. And here's what I came up with. We got to put some jazz to it, make it dark.
Riders on the storm. Riders on.
Immediately after this album, though, Jim retreated to Paris to go with Pam and do poetry, and would soon after die. Now, there's been a lot of debate to what happened to Jim. Did he have a heart attack from drinking and eating so damn much? Was he down so goddamn long? We don't know for sure. And they never gave a full autopsy. They just ruled it as heart failure. And it seems slightly suspicious because soon after this, Pam would die of an overdose of heroin. So some people think maybe he overdosed in the bathtub. Maybe Pam killed him. He was really unhealthy, even though he was pretty young, 27, not much older than me right now. He was a real big beer guzzling boy.
I hope at about age 120, with a sense of humor and a nice, comfortable bed with... No, I wouldn't want anybody around. I just want to quietly drift off. I think science has a chance in our lifetime to conquer death. I think it's very possible.
Well, if it did, what would happen to the spirit world?
Well, they just have to fend for themselves. Leave us poor immortals alone.
So this is the end, beautiful friends. They would never do anything after this. They thankfully never did an album with someone else singing instead of Jim, or God forbid, a poetry album where they would take Jim's poetry that he recorded years ago and put music underneath, right? Now I do want to talk about the Doors movie because a lot of people involved with the Doors and Jim hate this movie and think it's a horrible bastardization of who he was and that they just portray him as a drunken asshole. And there are some scenes in the movie that are the worst scenes where it's very clearly over the top and stuff that Jim probably never did.
You have ruined another Thanksgiving. God, bastard, you killed my duck!
But I think the band's kind of overreacting. Ray especially had an issue with this movie, and I think, honestly, Val Kilmer's great performance as Jim, and he sang all the songs too, did a great job, as well as Oliver Stone's direction. He just never misses. This script could be terrible, and Oliver Stone would direct the hell out of it. And the visuals go so well with the Doors, it's honestly like a long music video, which is how all biopics should be. And that's unfortunately the end of the story of the Doors. Ray Manzarek had actually died a couple of years back, so there's only 2 members left. But we're not going to close the door on the Doors. The music's never over, so never turn out the light.
His world on you depends. Our life will never end. The ultimate statement, our life will never end. And the ancient Egyptians used to say that if you say a man's name, he is alive. So I take this opportunity to say Jim Morrison.
Subscribe to the Downfall Network.
No!